years to mend your broken heart since Miss Nato revealed to you on Christmas Eve she'd slept with your best friend. That news, you say, has devastated you beyond words.
Yes, sir.
You slept with them both and now have no idea which is 2-year-old Cameron's biological father.
It's been over a year and a half. I had to convince my 4-year-old how he doesn't have a younger brother no more.
We needed to break up, that I needed to focus on me. He was just going to bring me down. And
I was mourning in my own way, Your Honor.
As much as I tried to stop him, he left anyways. The day he passed away was the day his best friend told me that really he had broken up with me for the girl upstairs. Anybody passed away, never mind somebody you were so close to. So we went out afterwards and we had some drinks. Absolutely not.
But at some point,
and who did you come to the wake and funeral with?
I came with him.
You came to the funeral with his best friend?
Yes, I did.
This court case unfolds as a deeply complex paternity dispute that places emotions, evidence, and accountability on the evidence stage in a divorce-like family conflict. Inside the courtroom, Judge Lauren Lake carefully manages a situation involving a mother, 2 men who were once best friends, and a child whose future depends on biological truth. The case reflects the harsh reality that DNA test results do not only reveal parentage, they expose decisions, betrayals, and consequences that cannot be undone. From the beginning, the court makes clear that this is not entertainment, but a legal determination with lifelong implications involving child support, parental rights, and the concept of justice in jurisprudence. At the center of the case is a mother who admits she does not know who the biological father of her young son is. She explains that during a period of grief, confusion, and emotional vulnerability, she became intimate with 2 men within a close time frame. These 2 men were not strangers. They were lifelong friends. Their bond, once built on loyalty and shared history, now stands fractured under the weight of uncertainty and resentment. The court listens as the timeline of events is reconstructed, step by step, with Judge Lauren Lake guiding the process to separate emotional narratives from legally relevant facts. One man comes to court believing he is the father because he was present during the pregnancy and birth. He signed the birth certificate, bonded with the child, and assumed responsibility emotionally and socially. His testimony reflects the psychological toll of doubt. He describes how public comments, physical resemblance debates, and outside opinions gradually eroded his certainty. His experience mirrors many DNA test cheating stories where trust is undermined not by evidence, but by suspicion. The court acknowledges that emotional belief does not equal biological proof, and that adverse inference in Evidence Act principles do not allow assumptions to replace verified facts. The second man, the former best friend, enters the courtroom under heavy scrutiny. He admits to a relationship with the mother, but insists that the circumstances were misunderstood and emotionally driven. He explains how community pressure, family expectations, and moral judgment pushed him into a role he never anticipated. His testimony highlights how people regret taking responsibility before knowing the truth. A theme often discussed in the Truth Changes Everything podcast and the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where legal clarity is emphasized over emotional impulse. Judge Lauren Lake addresses the broader relationship between law and justice, explaining that the court's role is not to punish moral failure, but to establish factual truth for the benefit of the child. She emphasizes that paternity court is not about revenge, humiliation, or winning arguments, but about protecting a child's right to know their biological parent. The court notes that unresolved paternity can lead to years of conflict, inconsistent parenting, and legal instability, especially when child support obligations and custody rights are involved. Throughout the proceedings, the evidence stage in divorce case-style questioning reveals contradictions in timelines, inconsistencies in statements, and emotional reactions that demonstrate how memory can be distorted by guilt and grief. Judge Lauren Lake maintains firm control, ensuring that all parties are heard without allowing emotional outbursts to derail the legal process. The court carefully documents who was present at key moments such as hospital visits, birth certificate signing, and early childcare responsibilities. The mother's testimony becomes central to the case. She expresses regret, confusion, and exhaustion from ongoing conflict. She explains that her goal is closure, not reconciliation. Her statements reflect themes common in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where acknowledgement of mistakes becomes a necessary step toward healing. She makes clear that she wants the correct father identified so that the child is not raised in uncertainty or subjected to future legal disputes. As the case progresses, Judge Lauren Lake addresses the psychological harm caused when adults delay truth. She explains that children form attachments based on consistency, not biology, but the law must still establish biological parentage to ensure legal clarity. This moment reflects broader adoption stories, full episodes where courts must balance emotional bonds with factual parentage. The judge warns that delaying DNA testing often causes deeper trauma, reinforcing the importance of early truth. The courtroom atmosphere grows heavier as both men confront the possibility of irreversible outcomes. One man fears losing a child he has emotionally claimed. The other fears being legally bound to responsibilities he did not expect. Judge Lauren Lake explains that fear does not alter genetic reality. She reminds the courtroom that Supreme Court child support precedents affirm that biological truth is foundational to lawful responsibility, regardless of personal preference. When the DNA test results are finally introduced, the courtroom reaches its emotional peak. The judge explains the scientific certainty behind the testing process, reinforcing that DNA evidence stands above speculation, rumor, and visual resemblance. This moment reflects the core message repeated across legal education platforms and podcasts such as the Divorce Course podcast. Evidence determines outcomes, not belief. The results confirm the biological father with definitive clarity. Judge Lauren Lake announces the finding with measured authority, ensuring that the decision is understood as factual, not punitive. The emotional reactions that follow demonstrate how truth can simultaneously bring relief and devastation. One man experiences validation and grief at once, realizing his emotional suffering had a factual foundation. The other confronts the loss of a role he had already begun to relinquish internally. Following the results, the court shifts focus toward the child's future. Judge Lauren Lake outlines next steps involving legal fatherhood, parental responsibility, and potential child support arrangements. She stresses that the court's involvement does not end with truth, but continues with accountability. The judge reminds all parties that co-parenting requires maturity, boundaries, and respect, regardless of past conflicts. The case concludes with a broader reflection on justice. Judge Lauren Lake speaks to the importance of honesty, timely action, and personal responsibility. She explains that while courts can determine biological facts, healing requires personal growth beyond the courtroom. This closing message echoes discussions found in legal education and relationship podcasts, reinforcing that law provides structure, but individuals must choose integrity. This courtroom story stands as a powerful example of how a DNA test can dismantle denial, expose consequences, and redefine relationships forever. It demonstrates the fragile intersection of emotion and law, showing that while truth may arrive late, it remains the only path toward stability for the child at the center of the case. The courtroom remains focused not on blame, but on resolution, as Judge Lauren Lake continues to frame the case within the broader responsibility of family law. She emphasizes that paternity court exists to prevent children from becoming collateral damage in adult conflicts. The judge explains that unresolved fatherhood disputes often evolve into long-term legal battles involving custody, visitation, and child support, creating instability that follows a child into adulthood. This case, she notes, reflects how delayed truth can fracture not only relationships, but entire family systems. Attention turns to the emotional consequences already experienced by the child. Judge Lauren Lake explains that when a child forms bonds under uncertainty, those attachments become fragile. The court acknowledges that while one man stepped into a parental role, his involvement was built on belief rather than proof. The judge clarifies that the law does not diminish emotional bonds, but it must establish biological facts so that legal obligations align with reality. This reflects the core concept of justice in jurisprudence, where fairness is grounded in verified truth, not assumptions. The discussion expands into the role of evidence and credibility. Judge Lauren Lake highlights how testimony alone can be influenced by memory gaps, emotional trauma, and self-protection. This is why DNA evidence stands as the most reliable form of proof in paternity cases. She explains that unlike circumstantial evidence or witness statements, genetic testing eliminates ambiguity. The courtroom is reminded that adverse inference in Evidence Act principles cannot replace scientific certainty, especially when a child's legal future is involved. The mother's position is revisited with deeper scrutiny. She acknowledges that her earlier decisions contributed to the confusion, but stresses that her primary goal now is stability. She explains that ongoing conflict between the two men has created emotional chaos, making co-parenting impossible without legal clarity. Her testimony reflects a broader pattern seen in many DNA test cheating stories, where secrecy and delayed honesty lead to compounded harm rather than protection. Judge Lauren Lake addresses accountability directly. She explains that accepting responsibility does not mean accepting blame for the past, but committing to lawful and ethical behavior moving forward. The biological father is reminded that fatherhood extends beyond DNA results. It involves consistent presence, emotional maturity, and financial responsibility. The court references Supreme Court child support principles, emphasizing that support is not punishment, but a legal duty tied to the child's welfare. The non-biological father is also addressed with empathy. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges the grief associated with detaching from a child one has emotionally claimed. She explains that courts recognize this loss, but cannot allow emotional attachment to override biological fact. This moment reflects themes often explored in adoption stories' full episodes, where love and legality must coexist without contradiction. The judge encourages emotional closure while reinforcing legal boundaries. The courtroom atmosphere shifts toward reflection. Judge Lauren Lake explains that many paternity disputes originate from avoidance rather than malice. Fear of consequences often delays truth, but delay only amplifies harm. This aligns with discussions from the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where legal professionals stress that early honesty prevents long-term damage. The judge notes that had DNA testing been conducted earlier, years of emotional strain could have been avoided. The role of communication is examined. Judge Lauren Lake highlights how misinformation, assumptions, and external opinions intensified conflict between the two men. Friends, family members, and social circles contributed speculation that blurred reality. The court explains that legal determinations must remain insulated from social pressure, reinforcing why courtroom proceedings differ from public opinion. This distinction underscores the relationship between law and justice, where objectivity must prevail over emotion. As the case progresses, Judge Lauren Lake outlines procedural next steps. Legal documentation will be updated to reflect biological parentage. The birth certificate issue is addressed, with clarification that legal corrections follow DNA confirmation. Child support proceedings may be initiated separately to determine appropriate financial contributions. The judge stresses that compliance with court orders is mandatory, not optional, and failure to comply can result in legal consequences. The discussion also touches on co-parenting expectations. Judge Lauren Lake explains that hostility between adults directly affects children's emotional development. She urges all parties to disengage from personal resentment and focus on cooperative parenting strategies. While the court cannot mandate emotional harmony, it can enforce behavioral standards. This reflects guidance often shared in the Divorce Course podcast, where structured cooperation replaces emotional negotiation. The mother expresses concern about future interactions between the men. Judge Lauren Lake reassures her that the court's determination establishes clear roles, reducing conflict. She explains that ambiguity fuels disputes, whereas clarity provides structure. This principle is central to family law, where defined responsibilities minimize future litigation. The judge emphasizes that moving forward requires acceptance, not continued argument. Judge Lauren Lake then broadens the discussion to societal lessons. She explains that paternity court cases serve as cautionary examples. They illustrate how impulsive decisions, secrecy, and avoidance can entangle multiple lives in prolonged legal conflict. She stresses that DNA testing is not an accusation, but a tool for truth. Her message aligns with insights from the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where transparency is framed as a form of protection, not threat. The courtroom also acknowledges emotional recovery. Judge Lauren Lake references celebrate recovery testimonies, noting that acknowledgement of mistakes is often the first step toward healing. She encourages all parties to seek counseling or mediation if needed, emphasizing that legal resolution does not automatically result in emotional closure. The court's role ends with judgment, but personal growth must continue beyond it. As proceedings near conclusion, Judge Lauren Lake reiterates the court's findings in clear terms. The biological father is legally identified. The child's right to support, identity, and stability is affirmed. The non-biological father is released from legal obligation, allowing him to rebuild his life without unresolved responsibility. The mother is instructed to cooperate fully with future legal processes to ensure consistency for the child. The final moments of the hearing emphasize dignity. Judge Lauren Lake reminds everyone present that courtroom decisions are permanent records. She urges respect for the process and for one another, even in disagreement. Her closing remarks reinforce that justice is not about victory, but about resolution rooted in truth. This case stands as a detailed example of how the legal system confronts emotional complexity with factual precision. It demonstrates that while relationships may fracture, the law remains anchored in evidence. The DNA test did more than identify a father. It restructured lives, clarified responsibility, and established a foundation for the child's future. In this courtroom, truth did not heal everything, but it made healing possible. As the hearing reaches its final phase, Judge Lauren Lake reinforces that the court's responsibility does not end with announcing DNA results. She explains that truth without structure can still lead to chaos, which is why the law immediately follows biological confirmation with enforceable obligations. The courtroom is reminded that once paternity is established, the legal system moves from uncertainty into governance, ensuring that the child's needs are met consistently and lawfully. Judge Lauren Lake speaks directly about child support, clarifying common misconceptions. She explains that child support is not compensation to one parent and not a reward for past behavior. It is a legal mechanism designed solely to protect the child's right to stability, health care, education, and basic living needs. Drawing on Supreme Court child support principles, she explains that support obligations are calculated based on income, not emotion, and enforced regardless of personal disputes between adults. The biological father is advised of his rights as well as his duties. Judge Lauren Lake outlines that with paternity comes the opportunity to be present in the child's life, but also the responsibility to act in the child's best interest. She emphasizes that fatherhood is not proven in one courtroom moment, but demonstrated over years through consistency and accountability. The court makes it clear that failure to meet obligations can result in legal penalties, reinforcing that this determination carries lasting consequences. Attention is also given to the emotional aftermath. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges that legal clarity can feel abrupt when emotional wounds are still open. She explains that many people regret taking chances that led to court involvement, not because they sought truth, but because they delayed it. This reflection aligns with themes often discussed in the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where delayed honesty is identified as a primary source of long-term damage in family disputes. The non-biological father is given space for closure. Judge Lauren Lake validates the grief associated with letting go of an assumed role. She explains that while the law cannot preserve emotional bonds formed under mistaken belief, it does recognize the psychological impact of separation. This acknowledgement reflects the nuanced balance between empathy and legality, a balance central to the relationship between law and justice. The mother's role is addressed with firm clarity. Judge Lauren Lake explains that moving forward requires consistency, transparency, and cooperation. She warns that any attempt to blur boundaries after legal determination can destabilize the child's sense of security. The court emphasizes that clarity is not cruelty, but protection. The mother is reminded that children thrive when adults present unified expectations, even if personal relationships have failed. The judge then reflects on how this case mirrors broader patterns seen in paternity courtrooms nationwide. She explains that many disputes arise from overlapping relationships, poor communication, and unresolved grief. These factors often converge during moments of vulnerability, leading to decisions that carry permanent consequences. This observation echoes discussions found in the Divorce Course podcast, where emotional decision-making is frequently identified as a precursor to legal crisis. Judge Lauren Lake addresses the role of the courtroom as a place of accountability rather than judgment. She explains that while the public often views paternity cases as dramatic confrontations, the court views them as procedural necessities. Each question, document, and test exists to eliminate uncertainty. This perspective reinforces the concept of justice in jurisprudence, where fairness is achieved through methodical evaluation rather than moral condemnation. The courtroom discussion briefly touches on how society often pressures individuals to assume roles prematurely. Judge Lauren Lake explains that social expectations can push people into accepting responsibility before truth is confirmed. This pressure, while sometimes well-intentioned, often leads to resentment and conflict. The judge emphasizes that legal processes exist precisely to protect individuals from being bound by assumptions rather than facts. Judge Lauren Lake also addresses the impact of external voices. Family members, friends, and community opinions were shown to have influenced perceptions throughout the case. She explains that while support systems are important, they can also distort reality when speculation replaces evidence. The court reinforces that legal truth must remain insulated from rumor, reinforcing why DNA evidence holds such authority. As the hearing moves toward closure, Judge Lauren Lake reiterates the scientific integrity of DNA testing. She explains that genetic testing is governed by strict protocols, chain of custody requirements, and statistical certainty. This explanation is offered not just for the parties present, but as public education, reinforcing that DNA results are not opinions, but measurable facts. This moment reflects educational discussions often featured in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where scientific evidence is highlighted as the backbone of modern family law. The judge then speaks about future conflict prevention. She explains that once legal roles are established, continued conflict often arises from refusal to accept outcomes. The court encourages mediation, counseling, or structured communication plans if necessary. While emotional healing cannot be ordered, respectful conduct can be enforced. This guidance reflects practices often discussed alongside Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where structured support follows personal acknowledgement. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes that the child should never become a messenger, bargaining tool, or emotional substitute. She warns that involving a child in adult conflict can cause long-term psychological harm. The court stresses that all communication regarding custody, support, or visitation should occur through proper legal or cooperative channels, not through emotional confrontation. The final instructions clarify that any future disputes must return to the court through appropriate legal filings. Informal arrangements that contradict court orders are discouraged, as they often lead to renewed conflict. Judge Lauren Lake explains that structure is not restrictive, but protective, offering predictability for everyone involved. As the proceedings formally conclude, the judge delivers a broader message. She explains that cases like this serve as reminders of how fragile trust can be and how permanent consequences arise from temporary decisions. The courtroom is reminded that truth, while painful, is the only foundation strong enough to support a child's future. This message aligns with recurring themes in DNA test cheating stories, where avoidance ultimately collapses under factual certainty. Judge Lauren Lake closes by reaffirming that justice has been served not through punishment, but through clarity. The court has identified the biological father, defined responsibilities, and created a path forward. While emotions remain unresolved, the legal questions are settled. The child now has a clear identity, and the adults have defined roles. This case stands as a complete arc of uncertainty, conflict, and resolution. It demonstrates how the legal system navigates deeply personal issues with structured objectivity. It shows that while relationships may fracture, the law remains anchored in evidence and responsibility. The DNA test did not fix every emotional wound, but it ended confusion. In the end, the courtroom becomes a place where reality replaces speculation. Lives are reshaped, roles are reassigned, and accountability is enforced. Under the guidance of Judge Lauren Lake, the court delivers not just a ruling but a lesson. Truth may arrive late, but when it does, it changes everything.